Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been indicted for the fourth time. Prosecutors in the state of Georgia have charged him and his associates, accusing them of conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The defendants include his former lawyer and a former White House chief of staff. John Hendren has the story from the state capital, Atlanta.
For the fourth time, a grand jury has indicted former President Donald Trump for alleged crimes against the country he governed.
Thank you.
Leading this series of indictments against Trump and others, racketeering, a charge that usually targets organized crime rings, in this case for an alleged conspiracy to steal the state's presidential election.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
Also indicted, 18 others, including former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump lawyer Rudolph Giuliani, former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, and former aide John Eastman. The alleged conspiracy included a series of phone calls in which Trump pressured Georgia officials to overturn Joe Biden's presidential election victory in the state, including this notorious call to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
That alleged conspiracy also included false accusations and harassment of election workers, including Ruby Freeman, who said she had to go into hiding after Trump fans invaded her grandmother's home to make what they called a citizen's arrest. It also contained false allegations of ballot fraud.
This was an election that we won easily. We won it by a lot.
The alleged plot also contained a fake electors scheme in which Trump-backed electors tried to form a false slate of electors who sought to flip the state of Georgia for Trump after his loss. And it involved an extraordinary data breach in rural Coffee County, where Trump partisans were called in to scan votes in a fruitless search for massive fraud. Georgia was just one of several states Trump would have needed to win the 2020 election. But Georgia was a special case. It tended to lean Republican, and he lost by a small margin, a margin he asked Georgia state Republicans to make up to overturn his loss there. The Trump campaign issued a lengthy statement stating in part, they could have brought this 2.5 years ago, and they chose to do this for election interference reasons in the middle of President Trump's successful campaign. The indictment is the fourth in as many months. Trump faces state charges in New York for a hush money payment to silence a porn star ahead of the 2016 election, and 2 federal indictments, in Florida for mishandling classified documents, and in Washington for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Unlike the federal charges, if proved, the Georgia state charges cannot be pardoned by the next president. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Atlanta.
Brendan O'Connor is a professor of American politics at the University of Sydney. Brendan, you're joining us from Australia. Look, it would be easy to lose count at this stage of Trump indictments, but we can't lose track of the fact that this is completely unprecedented. Put that in context for us, please.
Well, democracy relies upon losers of elections, presidential candidates accepting the result. You can't say you're for democracy only when you win. And Donald Trump was clearly in breach of the American Constitution. He was in breach of the basic principle of the American electoral system of democracy, that if you do not win the Electoral College, you do not win the election. And he clearly lost the state of Georgia. There's just overwhelming evidence that he lost it by a reasonably significant margin. And he wished to, through a conspiracy, this is what the charges are about today, he wished to overturn what was the will of the people. And in any serious democracy, this should lead to serious investigation, and these charges, I think, are entirely justified as a result.
Donald Trump and his campaign are fundraising off of these indictments. Every time there are new criminal indictments, his campaign raises more money. Is it fair to say at this stage this is actually helping, fueling his campaign, at least the primary run? We'll get to the general election later.
Yeah, I think the basic point I'd make is it's the right thing to do, to charge Trump, no matter what the outcome. I think that to sweep this under the carpet and say, look, it's all political, the timing's not right, he has to be charged. Maybe it would have been preferable if these charges were earlier in 2021 or 2022, but a lot of evidence has been gathered, a very tight case in many regards, a major case, a kind of criminal conspiracy RICO law, quite sort of ironically something Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York, developed for criminal syndicates in New York City. So the election results of this are, to be determined. It surely is incredible publicity for Trump because he will play on the sense of victimhood. He's always played on the idea that sort of white men in America are some of the most discriminated against people, probably not truthfully the case in the majority of instances, but he's very much played on himself as a victim, as a martyr, and this will help with that. But it is still the right thing to do to charge him for this criminal conspiracy because he is trying to bribe and intimidate election officials. He's trying to come up with false electors, all sorts of things which fundamentally would undermine America as a democratic society.
So about that last point you make, Brendan, in this particular case, we've all heard that phone call. If this, you don't need to be an acute legal mind to understand what's going on here. It's that phone call between Trump and an election official in Georgia where he asks him to, quote unquote, find, those are his words, find 11,000 plus votes. And that does not appear, at least in the primary run, to be hurting him.
No, I mean, I think people have factored in the sense of believing Trump or not really caring. As I said before, that democracy is a good idea when you win, but not when you lose. So I think Trump, and this would be a problem with the jurors, that there will be people who will believe or want to believe what Trump's defense team say, that there's basically, they've chosen a team and Donald Trump is their team, no matter what the evidence. So this immunity to something like, the tape would be called a smoking gun in most legal or political corruption scandals. But we have to factor in, as we did with COVID, that, there are people in the face of enormous evidence with global warming who will just say, no, the opposite is true because my side says the opposite is true. And so therefore, Trump, is very much in a position to be able to look to politicize this, to politicize the jury, and whether this case will in fact, occur in 6 months, whether it will occur before the next election. I mean, that, I suppose, is my biggest concern, even though state cases can't be easily dismissed by a president. There'll be a lot of things if Trump is elected president and sworn into office in January 2025 that he'll be able to do to ensure that he doesn't come to trial.
Brendan O'Connor, Professor of American Politics at the University of Sydney. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.